I gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy.
Remarkable.
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. And this week, we're talking about B2B marketing lessons from Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs with the help of special guest, CMO Jotform, Steve Hartert.
You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees.
Steve, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Excited to chat Jotform, content, and of course, Steve Jobs. So why did you pick Steve Jobs, the book, to talk about today?
Well, honestly, Jobs is probably one of the best marketers that the business world has ever seen, and particularly in the tech world. He probably is the best marketer in the tech world in the history of tech so far to date. Purchased the book. I read it because I thought, this would be really interesting to see how this gentleman had run his life and what lessons are in there from anything else. But when you read the book, you find out that there's an awful lot of very good business stories in there. So while it's not a classical business book, it is loaded with business lessons. If you follow the book, I would say from another angle, there's lots to be learned in there about how people can actually foster, a growing business, how you can foster creativity, how you can rally troops, how you can stay focused, things like that. So there's an awful lot of good lessons to be learned in that book that I think a lot of people just miss.
And we're going to dig into a lot of them here today. Zooming out, tell us a little bit about your role as CMO at Jotform.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically in charge of global marketing, also, new product introduction, things like that. So basically, if it's got advertising, communications, PR, marketing, it's coming from my desk. So got a fantastic team scattered around the world. We've got a whole bunch of people here in San Francisco, massively talented, which helped make my job a whole lot easier. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what we do. We keep the company growing and we keep it moving forward.
Meredith, what the heck is Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs biography? Steve Jobs.
So for this, we're going back to 2003. This is right after Steve Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he was looking for someone to write his biography, and he turned to Walter Isaacson.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire.
I wasn't familiar with Walter Isaacson, but he is an incredibly accomplished, high-profile, respected author, journalist, professor. He teaches at Tulane University. He's written biographies of Benjamin Franklin, Einstein, there are a slew of others.
So when I got the call in 2004, I had published a book on Benjamin Franklin, was finishing one on Einstein, and Steve says to me, "Why don't you do me next?"
He's been the editor of Time, he's been the chair and CEO of CNN, and the president and CEO of the Aspen Institute. So I think Steve Jobs was really mindful of who he wanted to write his biography. And I would say Walter Isaacson he didn't jump at the opportunity. He basically said, well, we'll write it in 20 years when you've retired. And so it wasn't until about 2009 that he started working on it, but they had actually met before. So it was during Isaacson's tenure at Time that he first met Jobs. And Jobs was at the time pitching the first Macintosh computer to the editors there. And so they sort of knew each other on and off.
And even back then, he was a bit of a handful, and you could see two sides to his personality.
But around 2009, basically Jobs' health was suffering, and he had just had a liver transplant. And it was actually Steve Jobs' wife who was like, hey, now's the time. Like, we have to do it now. Otherwise, it's not going to get written. So the two men, this is sort of at the time where Isaacson dove into intensive research for the book. So they would meet over 40 times over the next couple of years, 2009, 2010. And it was often in Steve Jobs' living room. So they were spending a lot of time together personally. And then Isaacson went and did over 100 interviews with Jobs' friends, colleagues, family members. And then this is the part I thought was interesting, was he met with people who knew Steve Jobs, but weren't necessarily fans. He called them adversaries. And so I assume this is people who knew Jobs, maybe disagreed with him, didn't particularly like him.
Steve was a real jerk to other people.
And so that was an interesting part to his process. But the book not only talks about Apple, but it talks about Jobs' personal life, as all good biographies do, how he was adopted, his relationship with his friends and family.
He said, I always felt chosen and special. I felt I was, the normal rules didn't apply to me.
But when it came to Apple, Isaacson said Steve Jobs was really obsessive and a perfectionist. He said he obsessed over the color of the screws, over the finish of the screws, even the screws you couldn't see.
His father also cared very much about design. And he was building a fence with Steve one day when Steve was about 9 or 10 years old. And Paul Jobs said, we have to make the back of the fence just as beautiful and as well done as the front. And Steve says, well, why? Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever know. And his father said, yes, but you will know. And so all of that became part of this passion for perfection, but also the design sensibility of Steve Jobs.
And for example, with the original Mac, he made them redo the circuit board. They were done with it. He's like, no, go back. He wanted them to be the right color, have the right curves, even the whole shape of the machine. So Isaacson said it's one of the dichotomies about Jobs. He could be demanding and tough and irate. On the other hand, he got all A players and they became fanatically loyal to him.
Everybody who worked with him said, man, he would just get furious. He would, tear apart my ideas. He drove me absolutely crazy. And then they would pause and they would say, but he drove me to do what I thought was impossible. And I wouldn't give up the chance in the world to have worked with him.
He said, why? They realized they were producing with other A players truly great products for an artist who was a perfectionist and wasn't always the kindest person when they failed, but he was rallying them to do great stuff.
Steve got angry with everybody that worked with him. He was very impatient. He had a vision of what it was that you were supposed to be accomplishing it, and if you didn't do it fast enough or you didn't do it right enough, he definitely got angry.
And so he was super, super discerning, wanted only the top, as he said, A players on his team.
I think Steve Jobs fired me about 5 times. The first time Steve fired me was actually probably the most traumatic because I thought it was going to be the last time I would ever work with him.
And Isaacson said in the early days at Apple, they used to give an award to whoever stood up to Steve the best. Those people often ended up getting promoted, which I thought was really interesting. So he is tough to work for. And I think honestly, made some enemies in that whole process.
He threw things at people, nothing heavy, but he threw wads of paper at people, swore at people, criticized their clothing. He did all those things.
And in Isaacson's last meeting with Jobs, Jobs said, there will be things in this book I don't like, right? And Isaacson said, yes, partly because you can interview people right after a meeting they've had with Steve Jobs. And you interview 5 people and get 5 different stories about what happened. People have different perceptions of who he is.
I am forever grateful to him actually for the experience because now I'm so much better at what I do than I would have been without him.
The other interesting thing I wanted to say was I don't think Steve Jobs ever read his biography because he told Walter Isaacson that he would read it once it was published, but he actually ended up passing away just a few weeks before the publishing date in October of 2011.
I wonder.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. But a couple of lessons I sort of pulled from all of this is I felt like I was learning from both Walter Isaacson and Steve Jobs. From Isaacson, I learned you need to do intensive research to listen to our subjects, our customers, to include the good and the bad in a really honest way. And from Steve Jobs, we learned to be discerning about the people we work with, to have A players on our team, and that people have a different perspective of who we are, what our brand is, and that's sort of out of our control. But you just want to be obsessive about your work and make it fit your vision for what it could be and to be kind of ruthless about it in a way. But that was kind of what I took away from it. But curious, Steve, what you were thinking on that note.
Probably a lot of the same things. I echo some of the things you said because I guess maybe it was Winston Churchill said, if you're not making any enemies, you're probably not doing things right. So a little bit of that, I think, gets mixed in. But yeah, I mean, he surrounded himself with A players. And if you've ever been around a group of A players, you realize how this to work with that group. Because if you've ever had, I always the old joke, right? The Navy is only as fast as its slowest boat. Well, if you got a C player in that mix, it really pollutes the waters. So to have someone that has high expectations and people that are willing to deliver high expectations, you can do phenomenal things. And I think we've all been a part of a group at one time or another where we kind of surprised ourselves about what we were able to deliver when the task was very demanding. But if everybody can pull the oars in the same direction, you can accomplish an awful lot of great things. And, one of the things that I walked away with in the book, in addition to what we've already kind of mentioned, but it's have this kind of an insatiable curiosity about things. Look at how people use your products. Could be services, could be physical products. Look how people use it. Really have a good, solid understanding of that customer's wants and needs. And sometimes they don't know what they want or need until you show them something. And then they'll be like, oh my God, this is, radical. And I think it's, be daring. Don't be afraid to fail. That's something I think a lot of businesses, just business people and businesses in general, I think pull back the reins because they're afraid of failure for some reason. And failure teaches you how to succeed, I both thought. So, and I think it's just in being creative. Once you kind of meet all those other demands, how do you get the message out to people to want to now partake in your product or service? And you have to be creative to get their attention and keep that attention and then make that product obviously sell and continue to grow. So I think those are things that I walked away with. And again, you read that and, Jobs could be absolutely ruthless in some of the things he said to people. And this is early Apple. And even when he came back to Apple, early Apple, it was like, who is this guy? He was kind of really strange, but he learned an awful lot of lessons. And there's another book I won't get too far into, but if you ever want to read another book about it, it's called Creativity Inc. It's about Pixar and how they managed the creative process. And again, because he was there, he was one of the, he bought it from Lucas and off they went with that. But lots of really good business lessons on how you manage people and how you manage product and processes and things like that. So Isaacson's book, I think, to me, touches on so many different aspects of a company like an Apple that it just becomes a fascinating business book. And I've gone back and read the book, again, like 2 or 3 times now. In certain sections, I read it again because some of the information in there is so good that I think it just kind of stands the test of time. And 100 years from now, people are going to be talking about Jobs in the same mention that they're talking about like Henry Ford and other great business people that kind of revolutionized just the business world and the world in which we live in.
Yeah, it reminds me of the quote, how you do anything is how you do everything. And it's like for Steve, the screws on the inside of the Mac, that's such a good anecdote because it's quintessentially him, but also shows you how he would do anything, right? It's like if something that nobody was ever going to see, it still has to be, the right way. And it's funny, you throw around sort of the word perfectionist and I don't know if there's a quote of him saying that he's a perfectionist or not or whatever, but the idea of seeking to do it the right way versus seeking perfection, I think is 2 kind of different things. And it's like to him, making sure that the screws are the right color or the curve or whatever. To him, I don't know if that's perfection. I think that that's the right way. I don't think he ever, was probably thought that his work was perfect. But to him, that there was a right way of doing it. And I think that, as a marketing leader, it's like, there's no right way to do it. There's a million different ways to do it. And if you were to chase perfection, you probably wouldn't necessarily be successful there. But if you were chasing sort of this idea of how to do things in a way that is, consistent and repeatable and driving business and taking bets and doing all those things that give you the best chance to win, that's, I think, what his abilities are, is to make the thing that is the best possible.
Yeah. I mean, and again, not a product person, but Vince Lombardi, when he was the coach of the Packers, told the team, we will relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well we'll never get there. But along the way, we'll become excellent. And apparently, again, reading Lombardi's biography, everybody in the room snapped up because they realized, yes, that puts them one step ahead of the competition. right? So again, you'll never reach perfection. No one can. I mean, you just never get there. I wish I could do this differently. I wish I could do that differently. But along the way, things will be excellent if you relentlessly chase the theory of perfection on something.
Yeah. I also, switching gears to Isaacson himself and in terms of the writing of this, I think it's an important reminder that to get what he felt like was enough information from Steve took 40 interviews. To get enough information, background from the rest of the world about Steve took 100. So at a minimum, just in interviews, if you assume that at least they're probably somewhere in the realm of an hour, but that's 140 hours just of interviews, not to mention additional research and all that other stuff to make, a seminal work in sort of, business and what he felt like needed to be done. Who knows how long? I mean, it seems like he spent obviously years and years on the book and probably off and on to a certain point, but that's a lot of work. And I think that there's so much in marketing. Like if you were to say, hey, we're going to spend 140 hours doing interviews to create one asset, one piece of content marketing, and you went and told your CFO, like, hey, this is what we're going to spend this amount of energy, they would say, well, you better be darn sure that it's going to return an ROI. And if you asked Walter Isaacson, I think he would probably be like, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if it's going to return an ROI. I don't know if this is going to sell, more copies because I do 140 versus 120 interviews. I don't know if I'm going to sell more copies because if I do 10 interviews versus 40, like I doubt he ever thought that way. He just did what he thought needed to be done to create the right work. And like that message to me is something that we so rarely do in marketing, which is like, what is the amount of work that needs to happen to create something great? And so often we say, what is good enough? And you have to do that, right? You have to do things that are good enough sometimes. But if you want to make something great, you have to do a great amount of work.
Right. Yeah, you got to spend the time at it. And I think to your point, spending 140 hours crafting something, with experience, you can shave that down, right? I mean, you can shave that 140 hours maybe down to 100 hours or maybe 50 hours or whatever time frame it might be. But I think the key in that pursuit of that dream is you need to sit there and look at the problem you're trying to solve from multiple angles. A lot of times what I have seen in marketing and just in other disciplines of business is people sometimes get surrounded by, yes people. They don't want to hear a bad thing. Oh, we're weak in this area or we're not good on that. You need to hear it because if you don't address the full 360 around your product or service to be able to defend that when something goes wrong, you're just walking yourself into a trap. And that's just a big blind spot that a lot of people have because it's like they don't want to hear the bad news because, again, they're afraid of failure. But if you can look at that and address it and go, well, wait a second, is that really bad? Could be a strength. If it's bad, can it be fixed? If it's bad, is it bad across the board for all of our competitors? It's just going to be a disadvantage for us when the competition comes at us. And so you have to stop and take a big, honest look at what you're doing there. And then from that point, push forward. Because if you just ignore it, that's, you're just setting yourself up for failure. I remember years and years ago, early in my career, trying to explain to my boss of what a SWOT analysis was. And I said, well, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And he stops me and goes, we don't have weaknesses. And I thought, wow, okay, this is good. And I went, okay. He says, wait, they're challenges. And I thought, well, you're really mincing words here. But, okay, we'll run with that for a while. But 2 years down the road, he was gone. Because again, he just would not acknowledge that there was problems with the business that needed to be shored up, or how can we work around these things? And some of them are just, geographical or something like that. You don't have the money to fix things, stuff like that. But that's something that a lot of companies don't want to do. And it's pride, and people will fall on their pride sometimes. And that's a big problem. And that leads to a lot of failure.
I love that you said looking at things from every angle. That's such a great lesson. Anytime you're making content, anytime you're doing any type of marketing, of looking at that thing from all the different perspectives, even the negative ones, even your adversaries, even, whatever enemy that you've created, realistic or otherwise, to look at things from their perspective. Because it's so true. It's like, how would this person perceive our marketing? How would this person perceive our marketing or our product or whatever it is? And you're so right that it's like, that's probably what makes the Steve Jobs biography so good, is he got all of those different things. And another thing that, with the creation process for Walter Isaacson that I think is important is, in the book, you don't know which interview he got which tidbit from. You don't know if he got something in, interview 21, and he takes a little note and he goes, well, that's an interesting disagreement that he was having there. I wonder who was there for that disagreement. And then he goes and finds that person or finds someone who was there, and goes on and on from there. And, Aaron Sorkin did this when he created Steve Jobs as well. It was sort of like pulling at these different threads and talking to people. He talked to a bunch of different people, that were there for those type of meetings. Like, how would this meeting go, and figuring that stuff out and figuring out and talking to those people. And I think that that's just so important. It's so important to like really be an investigator when you're creating content, is to say, okay, if this person is saying this one thing, there were other people in the room, what were their perspectives? And then go talk to those people, right? If you're talking to a CIO and they're like, well, I could have got this approved, but our CFO, said no. I was like, well, why did they say no? What were the things that led them to say no to this particular, thing? And maybe if you talk to them, you'd get an additional insight, and they go, oh, it wasn't me. It wasn't this. I wasn't the one who said no. That was actually, our CTO said that we don't need to do budget because she's going to make it, and you get into this, he said, she said sort of a thing. And then you realize, find some, extremely interesting tidbit about it all. But I just love that idea of looking at things from different angles, pulling on the threads, finding those places where people were the most vulnerable or the most excited or the most mad, and pulling out those stories and then covering it from every angle.
Yeah. And again, and that to me is a key. I mean, if you, again, one of the great business books is, The Art of War. It teaches you how to look at things from a 360-degree view. And that's key. I mean, again, companies that knowingly leave a blind spot and ignore the blind spot and hope it goes away are setting themselves up for failure. And I think that's something that, in going through this bio of Jobs and understanding some of the thought processes, they looked at things from every angle that they think they possibly could. I mean, you read about how the iPhone was actually developed, and we think now we take it all for granted, but they were breaking new ground. And so how many prototypes they had, and how much curve should be on the bottom so you could reach down and pick it up, and how much should it weigh, and all these different things that went into it. Really, really minor changes that we would perceive, but end up having a big impact when the final product is put together. And that's stuff that I think that people just kind of forget about at times. But when you're breaking ground like that, there are no rules to follow. You're making the rules as you go along.
Okay. Other lessons from either Steve Jobs or the book or anything else?
Oh, I think it's being focused. There's a famous meeting that happened when Jobs came back to Apple in the late 90s. And I can talk about this because I had a friend that was actually in the meeting at the time. Jobs brought together, I don't know how many, 100 people or something like that, and product managers and engineers and whatnot, and said, okay, we're going to plot a course for how we're going to do this to turn Apple around. Remember, at the time, Apple was in dire straits. You think now, you look back and go, when was Apple ever in trouble? In the late 90s, they were about 6 weeks away from going bankrupt. And so he pulled all of his product managers and all staff down to Monterey for a retreat. And they said, okay, what do you guys think we should be doing here? Let's hear some ideas. And they got out a whiteboard and they just started writing down ideas. And they had about 100 ideas on this whiteboard. And these are great. And they said, okay, pick 4 of them, because that's all we can do. And so what it takes then is you can start eliminating, well, these are nice to haves, but not gotta haves. Or these are pipe dreams or moonshots or whatever you want to call them. And you can eliminate probably half. And then you eliminate another half of that, because you realize, okay, that's going to take this, and we're not there yet. We don't have the resources or the talent, or the technology's not there yet, whatever. Now you're down to 25. So now you're really getting into the higher up that pyramid of what you're going to do. And the decisions start getting a lot more difficult to make, because they're probably all 25 are probably really good ones, but you have to really start thinking about which ones are going to have the biggest impact. And so from that, they just kept grinding and grinding and grinding and pushing and talking and discussing. And again, it was not there was no animosity in the conversation. So it was a very spirited conversation, but everybody knew what the goal was. Let's figure out what's the best thing. And in that process, the 360-degree view came into play because we could do this. Microsoft would respond with that, or Microsoft's not doing this, or, any of the other vendors out there at the time. And they settled on the 4 things, right? And they basically came up with a quadrant and said, okay, we've got professionals and we have consumers, and what's going to go in each one of these kind of quadrants and things like that. And that's where they came down to. And so they ended up having focus for products of what products they were going to be working on for the next 2 or 3 years. And now you can rally the team around those because it's very easy to explain what we're doing because you've already hashed all those out. So all the objections and the pros and cons to everything have been hashed out. You know what you're going to do. The team is now excited about doing it. So now they want to take this back to their teams and start pushing forward. But you've got such a clarity in the focus of where you're going to take that company that you really can't mistake what you're trying to do. There's no gray areas. It's very black and white. And that's something that's very important. Again, and companies lose that. They get distracted by shiny things and what's the latest trend or something that we could pop out there and so we can get the stock price up for the next quarter. And so they just kind of bob and weave rather than pushing through on a forward path and say, we're going to do this and it's going to be tough to get there, but we need to do this. And so if you can keep the focus going and know where you're headed, that puts you far ahead of the game. And that's what came out of this meeting. And that's what the company then had a mission of what they were going to do. And so from there, they were able to rally all the troops and keep people focused on the ultimate goals that they were trying to do. And, obviously the results have panned out tremendously.
One of my favorite CMOs is our guy Chandar, former CMO of Coupa and many other Marketo and other places. And his big lesson that he always reminds me of is you get to pick 3 things that you're focused on in marketing. There's 3 plays that you can sort of be running. And if you do any more than that, then you're probably not going to do them very well. And it is so hard to pick 3 because you say, well, okay, maybe we'll just do this one thing, or maybe we'll do this one experiment. And then you realize you're like, well, it's not properly resourced. It's not going to be done the right way. It's not going to be done thoroughly enough, whatever. And those things can sort of never end up working. And I always go back to that of like, how can you do 3 things extremely well? Focus is the most important thing in marketing, I think, because without it, you'll just spend all your money.
Yeah. You spin your wheels, you spend money, and at the end of the day, they're like, where's our ROI? And you have nothing to show for it. And that's what happens. I mean, again, that's when people get distracted by shiny things and lose track of what they should be focusing on. And yeah, 3 things, that's great. But to get to those 3 things, you have all those conversations and all those discussions and all those debates and the fights and everything else to get there. But when you identify those 3 things, you know what you're doing. And, again, the plan that you need to do almost writes itself at that point because you have analyzed it. I won't say analyzed it to death, but you have analyzed it, again, that 360 view on it. And everybody knows what the expectations are, what needs to be done. If you continue to do it right, you've eliminated all the distractions that normally would pop up and deflect your attention to someplace. And that's where people fall into problems when they do that. And it's really tough. I mean, it takes an awful lot of self-discipline to stay focused. It takes an awful lot of business discipline to stay focused because it's very easy to get distracted because people can always have second guess themselves. They have their doubts, whatever it would be. But if you did it right, there is no doubt and you'll know what you have to do to get there.
Another thing that I think just is worth noting for the story as sort of a footnote to our conversation is that Steve didn't ask for creative control in the book. And it's kind of very anti-Steve, which I think is kind of funny. It's like that he didn't want creative control over this, that he didn't have final say, that he wanted sort of transparency and honest accounting of what happened. And it's just really interesting that he did that. And I think it speaks to legacy and it speaks to the truth and controlling what you can control. And I just find it's just an important note about this whole process is that he didn't, give notes to Walter Isaacson, that he found the person who he wanted to tell the story and got out of the way.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It is interesting because he always kind of wanted creative control over everything. But I think one of the things he said when wanting to do the book, he wanted it for his kids. so they could understand where he was all those hours when he wasn't at home. But the other thing, I think he just wanted an honest representation of his life and what he had done at that point. I think he didn't want to have it whitewashed and then somebody would refute. I think he wanted to put it all out there, warts and all, and say, this is what it was. And if anybody wants to follow that path, they understand it's not easy. You're going to make enemies. It's going to be rough. You're going to second guess yourself. There's going to be setbacks, but you have to stay focused and you have to keep chasing that goal, because if you don't, there's failure. And I think that's one of the other lessons that comes out in this book, I think, is that there is all of this stuff. There's all these distractions. And you're going to make people angry. You're going to make hard enemies. But this is what happens. You look at this, he and Bill Gates, were arch rivals, but I don't think they ever personally hated each other. I think they had massive respect for one another because they just knew each other's strengths. And did they want to kill the other one? I don't think so. I think they wanted to kill each other's businesses out of plate, but that's a business competition. But on a personal level, I think they had mass respect for one another. And even in the book, there's mentions of Gates coming to visit Jobs and talking to Jobs, and even the last conversation they had together and things like that. Just total personal, massive respect for one another. And I think that shows out. I mean, again, those are some of the things that you can earn along your journey if you do it right.
Yeah, there's one quote from Steve Jobs that I really love about creativity. And I think it's important as we think about marketing and creativity. And he says, creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they feel a little guilty because they didn't really do it. They just saw something. It seemed obvious to them after a while. And I think that so much of creativity that we sort of feel weird or embarrassed or whatever when we make something creativity, the idea that creativity is something that is a force multiplier that has outsized results, that has outsized impact, is weird and foreign to us. After all the data and after all the things, surely it can't be just someone who is more creative than someone else that wins. That seems insane, right? But in reality, it actually is. Steve was just more creative than his competition, right? At the end of the day, Think Different was about creativity. All of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you get that message out? Everybody's got a computer, everyone's got a phone. How do you differentiate yourself from that competition? And it comes down to creativity.
And another quote that he says that I think sort of solidifies this for me is, you have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down and has made all the difference in my life. Again, this goes back to when you are a creative person, that you have to just trust your gut. You have to. You can trust in whatever it is that your gut means, but that belief that something needs to exist and you need to be the one to create it because nobody else has done it is so important. And again, in marketing, we shy away from this a little bit sometimes of oh, well, you're the marketing person. Of course, you're going to be the creative person. You're going to have these sort of things. And it's at the end of the day, sometimes you just have to say yeah, this is what I believe. I believe that this is the thing that will propel our business forward, or that this thing is important. And I can't prove that it's right. But I can't prove that Walter Isaacson needed to do 140 interviews in order to make the Steve Jobs book. He probably could have done it with half of those, and it probably would have been just as good. But that wasn't the right way. That wasn't what he thought needed to happen. And yeah, I just think that it's an important lesson to follow your gut.
No, and it's very true, because especially from the creative part of marketing, when you're doing advertising, is you can agonize over your copy. That content can make or break things. And so you're looking for the right word, the right resonance, the right tone of the sentence. Sometimes you're just writing a sentence or even a headline, right? And you're what tone, what feeling do we want to emote when this goes out? What do we want people to think about? And you can wrestle over those words for a very long time. And you can test them. You can do all sorts of things with it. But at a certain point, it's you've got to go with what you think is right. Because you might have, you talk to 100 people, 50 are on this side, 50 on that side. So now you got to make a decision here. And what are you going to do? You just got to follow your gut and say, you know what? I have to go against the grain here. Everybody says I should zig, but I'm going to zag, because I just firmly believe that this is the way to go. And sometimes, I think actually a lot of times, you're going to be right, because it's a new way and people are going to be I never thought of that. And this is where comes back to showing people a solution to a problem they probably didn't even realize they had. Because you've kind of done something really different to break out of that mold. And people are like, well, what? This can solve a whole lot of problems that I have. I didn't realize that something like this was out there. And that's just one of the side benefits of it all. But that's the ultimate goal, right? Is to get people attracted to your product or service and get them to want to jump on board and purchase it. And I think that's the key to it. So that there's a lot of gut trusting that people have to have. And that's tough to learn. That is a tough one to learn because, again, you'll fail a lot too. And but sooner or later, you'll figure it out. And I always say your gut never lies. Your gut will always tell you the truth. Whether you want to listen to that truth or not is up to you, but your gut will tell you the truth.
Any other thoughts on Steve Jobs' biography?
No, I strongly recommend it to any, if you're a marketing student, whether you're a graduate student or working on your bachelor's, I would say, read it. I mean, it's here, it's 13 years old and we're still talking about it. I think that says something to it. But I think there's an awful lot of lessons to it. Don't look at it as just a bio of a person that is no longer with us, but look at it from, the more holistic thing is what lessons are in here that I can learn from and maybe apply in my day-to-day, whether it's, you're in accounting or marketing or operations or whatever. What can I take from this? And what can I employ going forward? And that's the reason, I brought this up is there's just an awful lot of good information in there for the taking. It's up to you to figure what parts of it you can take and employ.
All right. Tell us a little bit about how you think about marketing at Jotform and your marketing strategy.
I'll just give you some background. When I came to Jotform, we had about 3 million users, I think roughly. I think we just crossed the 3 million threshold. And now we're knocking on 25 million. So we've grown pretty phenomenal. I've been here a little over 8 years now. The forms world is kind of ubiquitous. Not saying anything shameful. Forms are not exciting, but forms are a very key part of the business world. It's how people collect information from customers to corporations, how data can move back and forth. And that's also not only externally, but also internally with your employees and things like that. And so what you have to do is, the goal is how do you make it easy for people to deploy a form that they need to collect the information that they need without having to be a software engineer to do it. And so that was the goal we had, is how do you make this thing very, very easy for somebody to do it? We were doing, like they say, no code, low code before it was ever a buzzword. Mm-hmm. And so, our goal was how do you get people to use something as simple as a form when they probably are used to doing it with paper, or they didn't even realize that there was another option out there. So our goal has always been to show how easy it is, how simple it is to actually build a form, deploy the form, and then get the information into your system and then act upon that information. And that's really been our whole goal. It's just how seamless we can help you make that, as well as make it fit into your existing tech stack. And that tech stack may be as simple as I use Google Sheets or Excel to gather my data, or I'm using something like Salesforce or HubSpot or any other flavor of CRM or electronic medical records or things like that. Is how do you make it fit into your existing processes? And again, make it easy to do it. And that's really been our goal. Because again, we have companies that range from in the Fortune 25 down to a mom and pop bakery. When we talk to them, we research them, we find out the interesting thing is they all have the same problem that they're trying to solve. It's just the magnitude of the problem is different for someone like a Disney to the mom and pop bakery. They're trying to solve the same problem, but obviously the scale is bigger. And that's what's kind of interesting, we find, is that there's really just the same problems everybody's facing. Some didn't realize that they had this problem, but when you kind of present that solution to them, they're like, oh yeah, this makes it very simple to do. And so you have to make sure it works in different languages. It works in different accessibility formats. It can work in, not only on a computer screen, it can work on a tablet, it can work on a laptop, it can work on a phone, all sorts of different, avenues, because you never know where that customer is going to be when they're going to want to hand over their information to you, right? And I don't mean hand over like, here, market to me, but I want to buy something from you. I want to be on your mailing list, or I want to purchase a good or service from your company. So there's a exchange of information that happens here. And so our goal has always been to make that as frictionless as possible for the company to put out there and for that person and to provide the information that they need to give to buyers, certain buyer, rent, or whatever it is they're going to do with that thing. So that's been our goal. We have customers in about 195 countries, I think, around the world. Continues to grow. About 18, 19 languages we're available in. So it's been tremendous growth. You look at our, the competitive field out there. We have companies we compete against companies like Google and Microsoft, and they give away their forms. They're not charging for them, but we can competitively go against them because we can talk about things that we can do that they cannot do. And that's something that I think is a big deal to a big swath of the corporate world.
How do you think about creating content, and where does content sort of fit in your marketing stack?
Well, the content's one part of it is you're trying to explain what forms are for. But I think the bigger picture is you talk about here's a school, or here's a hospital, or here's a bakery, or here's a company of some type. How they employed a form and what kind of impact it had on their business, whether it was streamlining, getting information in, whether it was cutting costs, speeding up the information gathering process, things like that. Those are the things that we focus our content on. Is basically going to call them case studies is one part of it. So we do formal case studies, but the other part of it is just showing people what this form, how it will impact their company and what positive impacts it will have on their company, and make it easy and simple in a very cost-effective manner for them. To give you an example, there's a charter school in the Las Vegas area. They said they sent literally like 50 pages of forms that they had to have parents fill out every year when students enrolled. Typical school, right? My daughter's going to be in school, and here's all the paperwork we got to submit every year. And they talked about all the paperwork that had to be provided. So they had to make copies, mail it out. Things would get lost. Maybe something didn't get included. So there's a lot of physical labor and process that had to be followed to do it all. And then people would return 38 of the 50 pages, and they got to keep chasing. It's a lot of back and forth. So very time intensive, very very labor intensive, and cost intensive to do all that and then get the information in. They started working with Jotform, and they realized, they can just send all the information out to somebody. They could fill out the information at their leisure. If they were missing something, the form would say, you didn't complete this. Basically, they couldn't submit till they had everything finished. So the school was extraordinarily happy because now they're getting all the information, timely and complete. It ran right into their tech stack, so then they could action upon it if they needed to. Parents loved it because they didn't have this, ream of paper they had to complete. And it was just so much easier for everybody. And they saved, we've tried to actually quantify with them how many hours of just staff time every year they have saved. And it's probably north of 10,000 staff hours that they have saved in doing that.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And not to mention the cost, right, of the paper, the postage, all of that back and forth that they had to deal with. That's something you can actually point to and say, okay, that we spent, $8,000 last year on postage and paper. That's gone. But they, it also gives them the option then with the forms. It's like, now we can use these for other things we want to do, not just like student registration, but now we can use them for field trip permission slips, or we can sell T-shirts or hats for the school, or any other kind of merchandise they want to. So there's all these other avenues that opened up to them that they weren't aware of, all for that same cost. So that's the thing that, is eye-opening to companies, is they didn't realize we could do all of this. And so this is where all of our content rolls around, is did you know you can do this? These things you can do. Here's another school that did this. Here's another bakery that did this. Here's a manufacturer that did this. And it resonates because these are their peers. This is in their industry, and people are going, my God, I didn't realize that something like this was available. Now, the benefit of all this, right? So all this stuff gets published and we put it online, and these things have very long shelf lives. And so, but it also cooks your SEO. So your SEO people come in there looking for an online form, or they're looking for a registration, there's a registration form, and all that benefits then in your SEO juice. And so when people are just searching, they don't know what they're searching for. They just know, I need an online form. Jotform pops up as one of them, top search returns, things like that. And we also do an awful lot of video showing just how our products work, a lot of how-tos. We've introduced what we call Jotform Academy, which people can actually learn how to do all the different parts of it, not just make a basic form, but they maybe want to do some things called conditional logic, where if somebody fills out a form and they put in simple as male or female, it's going to present a whole bunch of different kinds of questions based on how you answered that, right? So how people can kind of do advanced form building and all these other types of things. Really and people have just responded tremendously to this, because again, you show them solutions to problems that they probably did not know that they had. And when they get that, they're just like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Why I was doing this so long the old way. And this is, again, with the charter school in Vegas came back with, they're just like so happy with us because from a business perspective, the business now is much more efficient, much more effective. They have everything they need. Parents are happier. And so, it's the classic win-win for everyone on something like that, because it's kind of revolutionized how they do things now. With all that staff time that's freed up, those 10,000 hours of staff time, they can do other key projects that need to be done for the school over the course of a year. I mean, that's like 5 full-time people.
That's crazy.
That's something you've added to your staff at no cost. Right. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that we talk about in our content. And that's the strategy of the content, because it's basically, how do you Jotform? And so people can do all these different types of things with it. And again, it opens up people's eyes that, I didn't know I had this problem, but yeah, we do have this problem. How do we solve this? What techniques are out there? And, it only costs this much money. That's great.
Any best practices on how you're getting those stories out there?
Well, we always work with our customers, but I think for us is we have such an incredible team of copywriters on staff that when they talk to our users and they get their stories and we work with them, and one, we don't want to say anything confidential that shouldn't have been out there, but it's really what problem are you trying to solve, and how did we help you solve it, and what are the results of it? So we kind of focus on like 3 or 4 things like that, and the story then spins out. Right, the story almost tells itself, because one thing businesses love doing is talking about themselves. Tell me about your business, and they'll talk. But when people have success and they're happy, there's an awfully good story to be told and lessons to be learned. And again, people understand that, there's efficiencies in there. So our team will talk, and then they figure out where that, we know these are the things that we want to focus on. And we look for those stories that help us resonate back on those messages. And that's one of the key things for us.
Steve, it's been awesome chatting with you. Our listeners can go check out jotform.com. Final question here. What's your best piece of advice for a CMO who's trying to figure out their content strategy?
I would say look around, look at what everyone else is doing out there, not only in your field, right? So let's say you're selling, mugs, or you're selling phones or phone cases or whatever. Look at what your competition's doing. Look at their messaging. See what they're doing. See what resonates with people. Talk to your customers. Honestly, know your customers. Know what they like about you, what they don't like about you. That's probably the biggest thing that people have to understand, is who their customer is, how they're buying you, why they bought you, and will they buy from you again. So really understand that customer through and through. Don't try to hide anything. Again, that 360. Know it all, know the warts and all. And then be curious, just again, because talking to your customers, be curious what's going on, but always be learning. There's always new technologies that are popping up out there, how to reach customers. There's always something new to learn in the marketing world. That's the beauty of marketing. I think it's dynamic as all can be. I mean, I look back when I started my career to where we are now. This is like, oh my God, I can't believe the tools that we have that we only dreamed of back in the day. But now we use them just like anything, almost like breathing air. We don't even think about it anymore. But it gives you the curiosity factor is always there. Again, there's something, don't be afraid to learn something new and to jettison off an old habit, because old habits sometimes die hard, but sometimes they need to die because they're just going to hold you back. And then they can partially just don't be afraid to fail. Marketing is littered with failure, and learn from your failures. Don't try to hide them. Don't try to avoid them. If you look at them, we do them here. Successes and failures. We do postmortems. What worked? What didn't work? Even the successes, you can look at them and go, what didn't work? What could we have done better? What did we miss? Is there anything there? And so once you kind of get all that mode in there, this is the learning process, you just start building on it. And then it gives you that focus when you're doing something. The next one, we shouldn't do this because this never seems to work right. But we can focus on these strengths and we can do these things. And I think that's the key takeaways that I would give anybody in marketing, not even the CMO, but if the lowest person at the department to the top of the chain.
Steve, wonderful conversation. Thanks so much for joining. Again, listeners can go to jotform.com. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
No, I just say keep coming back to Jotform. We always got something new happening, and we got lots of cool products and features down the pipe, and there's lots of things to learn from us. And we'll solve problems you probably didn't even know you had.
I love it. That's awesome. Thanks so much, and take care.
All right. Thank you much.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.